Clifton George. You may stay sitting down whilst I take some time to explain the sentence I am going to pass. The provisions of the Sexual Offences Amendment Act 1992 apply to certain matters I must refer to. Under those provisions, where an allegation has been made that a sexual offence has been committed against a person, no matter relating to that person shall during their lifetime be included in any publication if it is likely to lead members of the public to identify them as the victim of these offences. This prohibition applies unless waived or lifted in accordance with Section 3 of the Act. On the 17th of June 2025, you murdered Annabel Rook, the mother of your 2 children and your partner of over a decade. You brutally stabbed her 31 times. Although from the outset you accepted that you had killed Annabel, you claimed that you had lost control and denied murder on the basis of the statutory partial defence of loss of self-control pursuant to sections 54 and 55 of the Coroners and Justice Act 2009. As required by the law to do, I considered whether, after careful analysis, there was sufficient evidence for that defence safely to be left to a jury. I decided there was insufficient evidence under each limb of the statutory test. The remaining issue for the jury was what your intention was when you killed Annabel. After deliberation, the jury unanimously convicted you of murder. You have also pleaded guilty to 1 count of arson, being reckless as to whether life is endangered. The facts I take account of in sentencing you today are facts of which I am sure, having heard all of the evidence. During the trial, a coherent and strikingly consistent picture has emerged of Annabel Rook. She was perceived by those who knew her as kind, attentive, funny, and altruistically motivated, someone whose instinct was to support, to listen, to improve the life of others. That she tried to see the best in people, becoming a mother figure to those around her and offering reassurance and guidance in difficult personal circumstances, was borne out not just by the witness testimony, but shone brightly from the many WhatsApp and text messages, and in particular her voice notes, read and heard during the trial. Professionally and socially, she was committed to helping others. That sense of purpose shaped her entire life and was reflected in her successful charity, Mama Sue's, set up to create safe spaces to support vulnerable women. At the outset, I paid tribute to the family and close friends of Annabel Rook, particularly those who gave evidence during the trial. They remained in court through much of the evidence with dignity, forced by the denial of guilt to listen to the distressing circumstances surrounding the death of their beloved daughter, sister, and devoted friend. The victim impact statements of Annabel's parents, her siblings, and her close friends have been read to the court. The strength summoned by each to provide those statements is a testament to their love for Annabel. No summary of that evidence can do justice to the depth of grief they describe. Each echoes their understandable devastation at the loss of a bright, vibrant, and irreplaceable human from their futures. The impact on their own and their families' health and psychological well-being has been considerable and will continue. The continuing effect of your incomprehensible actions are felt minute by minute, hour by hour. Those acutely involved in what happened in the early hours of the 17th of June have suffered their own particular trauma. All describe how your actions have ripped away the innocence of your own children and those they spent their days playing with. To borrow the words of one, it will be a life's work to rebuild their sense of trust and safety. Their statements evidence the wider impact of your crime, the effects of which have resonated throughout the community Annabel lived and worked in, by the women she supported, and particularly by those living with the fear of male violence against women. Some underlined, as Annabel herself would have wanted, the importance of not seeing this particular tragedy within an interracial family as a reinforcement of racist views in a world where domestic violence exists, regrettably, across all communities and cultures. It is obvious that the gaping hole in the lives of Annabel's family, dear friends, and community will remain for all time. The sentence you get will not bring Annabel back. In contrast to Annabel, there are two sides to your personality, Clifton George. Annabel's family and the social circle you shared with Annabel recognised that you could be fun and friendly, generous and engaging within friendships. You could be affectionate and attentive, and you could be great with children, including your own sons, who you plainly adored. It was your ability to make people laugh, including Annabel, which initially endeared you to them, and which, as the court has heard, was a key factor in Annabel falling in love with you over a decade ago. However, having heard all the evidence, I am left in no doubt that there has always been another troubling side to your character. An overwhelming picture has emerged of your regular anger and volatility. Numerous witnesses described your pronounced temper with the reactions that could escalate rapidly, often sparked by petty or insignificant perceived slights. I am also sure, particularly on the basis of the heart-rending notes to herself left by Annabel on her phone, which she had no reason to believe would be read by others, that you were controlling and emotionally abusive. This aspect of your character was evident from the outset of your relationship with Annabel, which started over 12 years ago. Once you had both decided to commit to an exclusive relationship, you moved into Annabel's house. Not long after that, Annabel fell pregnant with your first child together. Even then, there were signs of your inability to control your temper. The one time even you accepted that you were physical with Annabel during your loss of temper was when she was 7 months pregnant. Having listened to all the evidence, I am sure that there were at least a few other times, as Annabel had related to her friends, when in private your anger crossed the line from shouting into physical intimidation. I am sure that this was an occasional rather than a regular feature of your anger. No doubt driven, in large part because of this side of your personality, it became increasingly clear to Annabel that she knew you and she had to separate. That she did not do so sooner, as is made clear from both the messages she sent to others and her own internal notes, was because of your children and Annabel's overwhelming desire to minimize their pain and anxiety. Matters came to a head in the months before June 2025. In the heat of your simmering anger about this issue, Annabel resolved that she had finally had enough. On the 8th of June, she told you she wanted a trial separation and asked you to think about moving out. You replied it would not be a trial. In the coming days, Annabel determined that she would support you financially in finding a flat nearby so that you would be able to be in the best position to co-parent the boys. You appeared to accept that you had no entitlement to force a sale of the house, which had always been owned by Annabel, or to any share of it, even though you thought Annabel had agreed in the past to give you half. You went away on a long-planned trip on the weekend with your friends. You came back hungover and tired. You had taken 2 days off to recover. You were drinking in the afternoon of the 16th of June. At 4:11 p.m, you said to the group of friends you had been away with that you had had 2 glasses of wine. Even though you denied it, I am sure that you carried on drinking. At 19:45, in the last message Annabel ever sent, she said, "He is drinking, which I don't like." There was no reason for Annabel to have said that if it was not true. You and Annabel had another argument that evening in which you remained angry that Annabel had confided in others, and in particular members of her side of the family, about what had happened to X when she had not told you or X's father. No one, apart from you, will know precisely what led you to violence that evening, but I am sure from everything I have heard that it is untrue that the first physical contact was a push from Annabel. She feared you. She feared your wrath, and to escalate the row in that way would have been completely out of character. In any event, you admit you started punching Annabel, and then you were on top of her, strangling her. You were shouting, "You lied, you lied." I'm sure the only thing on your mind was your grossly disproportionate sense of grievance that Annabel had confided in others about what had happened to X. Having heard all the evidence about Annabel's clear and single-minded intention to achieve amicable co-parenting arrangements after your separation, I am sure that whatever may or may not have been said during your row, Annabel did nothing from which you could have seriously believed you would be anything other than the weekend dad you knew you were about to become. At one point, you stopped strangling Annabel. You made the deliberate choice to retrieve a weapon. You went to the kitchen and returned with a knife. It is a grim fact that, given your love of cooking, this had been a thoughtful present from Annabel a few years previously. You returned, and in your rage and fury, brutally stabbed Annabel to death. There were a total of 22 stab wounds to her body. There were a further 9 defensive stab wounds to her arms. At least 5 wounds were administered with severe force. The deepest of these penetrated to a depth of about 11 centimetres. The most serious of all these wounds was one to the right breast, which passed through the right lung and into the right ventricle of her heart. From that moment, she did not have long to live. The pathological evidence demonstrated that some of the injuries to the abdomen had been caused after Annabel's collapse. You say that in the hours that followed, you made various unsuccessful attempts at killing yourself. You took a knife to your wrists, but evidently failed to cut a major artery. At around 4 a.m, you resolved to cause an explosion at the house. You said this was also to kill yourself. You retrieved a propane cylinder from the barbecue and, opening the valve, took it to the basement, located directly under the sitting room where Annabel's body lay. You lit some kitchen towel and dropped it into the basement. This caused an enormous explosion, and you were wholly reckless to the damage you may cause to the house, to your neighbours and to their house, and to anyone who might have happened to have been close by. When asked to explain what had happened by the emergency services in the immediate aftermath, you remained fixated on your self-absorbed belief that Annabel had betrayed you by respecting X's wishes not to tell you or her father what had happened to her until she was ready. For murder, the sentence I am required by law to pass is one of life imprisonment. I must determine the minimum time you are to serve before you are eligible to apply to the parole board to be released on licence. In doing so, I have regard to the general principles set out in Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Act 2020. Although you stopped your assault, and I am sure deliberately chose to walk to the kitchen to find a weapon with which to continue your attack, it is clear on the authorities that this does not, of itself, bring the murder within subsection 4.1, which relates to an offender taking a weapon to the scene. The relevant subsection is therefore subsection 5. The starting point under that section in determining the minimum term is 15 years. I must consider aggravating and mitigating factors. Of those in paragraph 9 of Schedule 21 in force at the time of Annabel's murder, the only aggravating feature to apply directly is the use of sustained and excessive violence. I have already described the evidence of your extreme ferocity. Although not forming part of those set out in paragraph 9, the following further aggravating features exist. The first two are matters to which reporting restrictions apply. Of my remarks are not subject to reporting restrictions. Third, in accordance with the Sentencing Council Guideline, Domestic Abuse Overarching Guideline, I find that the domestic context of Annabel's murder makes the offending considerably more serious. The killing of Annabel was the most extreme abuse of trust conceivable and was set against a history of regular emotional abuse in the preceding decade. Fourth, the use of a knife. Your decision to fetch a knife from the kitchen was a deliberate one and in itself a serious aggravating feature. Fifth, the murder had been committed when you had been drinking, and this would have been at least some contributory factor to the escalation to violence. Finally, the arson which followed will be a further aggravating feature. I will turn to this shortly. Next, I consider the mitigating features. There are few. I am sure you intended to kill Annabel. That is not itself an aggravating feature, but it deprives you of potential mitigation had I accepted that you only intended to cause really serious harm. I accept that the violent assault ending in Annabel's murder was not premeditated. On the basis of the facts, as I am sure they were, I categorically reject the suggestion by your counsel that there existed provocation falling short of loss of self-control. I take into account the fact that you had no previous convictions prior to the night in question. This must, however, be seen in the context of the long-standing domestic emotional and physical, occasionally physical abuse I have described. Whilst you have expressed remorse through your counsel and expressed this at one point to the psychiatry team shortly after the killing, there was and has been little other sign of it before or during the trial. I make clear that your decision to exercise your right to a jury trial is itself not an aggravating feature. However, your plea and the consequent pain and anguish caused to Annabel's family and friends in having to endure the process does not reflect any genuine understanding of or remorse for your actions. It is striking that not once during your evidence did you say that you were sorry for what you had done. I accept that certain aspects of your childhood included traumatic episodes. However, the mitigation this of itself affords in the context of what you have done is limited. I have also read the reference given by your younger brother. In relation to the offence of arson, being reckless as to whether life is endangered, there is a specific sentencing guideline which I will follow. In relation to your culpability, I accept that you did not intend to endanger life, but that you were reckless as to whether life was endangered. This is culpability B. Harm is category 1, in light of the very high value of damage caused. This has been assessed in the region of £350,000. The starting point for category 1B is 6 years, within a range of 4 to 10 years. This was aggravated by the fact that multiple people were endangered. On the evidence, I am sure that you started releasing gas at a point at which you were not sure the house was empty. In any event, in circumstances where, on any view, your neighbours in the semi-detached property next door were sleeping at most a few tens of yards from your intended explosion, this is a particularly strong aggravating feature. I am also sure you had in mind that blowing up the house would impact the evidence of what you had done. There is no other conceivable explanation for your decision to put the gas cylinder in the basement directly underneath the living room. I am not sure that you had an intention to impact your children's inheritance. This offending is also aggravated by the fact you were drunk at the time. In terms of mitigation, the same mitigation in respect of your difficult upbringing and your lack of previous convictions applies. In addition, you pleaded guilty to this offence at the PTPH and are therefore entitled to a credit of 25%. Taking account of aggravating and mitigating factors, had this offence been considered in isolation, an appropriate sentence would have been 8 years imprisonment after a trial. It would therefore have been 6 years, taking into account your guilty plea. I will pass a concurrent sentence in relation to arson, but will take it into account as an aggravating feature when deciding the minimum term which you are to serve for murder. I do not simply add the sentence for arson to the minimum term I otherwise would have ordered, but I make a reduction in accordance with the guideline on totality. I impose the victim surcharge and order forfeiture and destruction of the knives seized in evidence. I order that count 3 lies on the file in the ordinary way. You are entitled to a credit for the number of days you have served on remand. That is 350 days. Stand up, Clifton George. For the murder of Annabel Rook, the sentence I am required to pass is one of life imprisonment. The minimum time you are to serve before you are eligible to apply for parole to be released on licence is 23 years. From this is deducted the 350 days you have already served. That is therefore a term of 22 years and 5 days. For arson, you are sentenced to 6 years imprisonment to be served concurrently. Whether you are to be released after the minimum term I have ordered is a decision for the parole board and will be decided on the basis of whether, at that point, you no longer present a danger. If you remain a danger, you will serve longer than the minimum term and may never be released. If you are released, you will remain liable indefinitely to be recalled to serve the remainder of your sentence, that is, until the end of your life, should you breach any of the conditions of your licence. You may be taken from the dock.